to go. Yeah, I'll call you back. I'm with that realtor lady.
Welcome to The Realtor Lady. I'm Michele Replogle. Today I have a guest, Jack Mancarella. He is a home inspector. His company is American Inspection Service. And we're going to talk a little bit about home inspections. What are they? What are some things we're seeing now versus in the past? And a little bit about Jack. Take it away, Jack.
Good morning, Michele. Thanks so much for having me on. Appreciate the opportunity. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about the history of home inspections real quick, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
So back in home inspections started early in the 70s. And at that time, they were doing maybe 6% of transactions. And then by 2009, that jumped up to 80%. And a lot of this growth was California-led, mostly because of lawsuits, basically.
We are a consumer state, yes.
Yeah. So it used to be, Uncle Bob drove by a job site. Now he's going to come into the house and tell you if it's good enough to buy. And so the industry has grown quite a bit from that, as you can imagine. Years ago, too, it was all about walking around a property with a pencil and a paper and a measuring tape. And now it's very much electronic. Most things are done even on cell phones or tablets. Of course, lots of photos, as well as great technology like thermal imaging, which is being able to see sometimes, if the conditions are correct, thermal anomalies inside walls or under floors. The one caveat or the one concern with thermal imaging, however, is the inspector should be knowledgeable about determining what he is seeing. If you cannot read the data, don't do it, in my opinion.
Right. Let me just jump in here real quick. So I had my first home inspection in 1994 with my first house.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of going in a little bit in the past with that. So that home inspector came out. It was with a local realtor. And they talked. He barely said anything to us. He talked to the real estate agent, and they had a conversation, and then it kind of trickled back. I think the report was pretty bare bones, but we did use it as a list of things to do on the house going forward. We were pretty much told the seller wasn't going to do anything in terms of work, so we had to kind of whatever was there, we had to accept. But I know looking back, I think it was an okay experience. She did the right thing by having us get a home inspection. But I think now, and especially with you, I appreciate home inspectors that talk more to the consumer and kind of cut that middle person out of what they're really talking about. And I realize the consumer can't always understand some of the vernacular, but I think that's somewhere we've kind of come ahead too, is that where home inspectors realize that they really do have to make sure there's some sort of understanding of what they're seeing and what that might mean to them in terms of their future home ownership versus just talking to me. And then I go, don't worry about it. You need a roof in 10 years.
Well, yeah, it used to be
what it was.
Absolutely. I think honestly, it was more sort of a good old boy sort of thing years ago. And you're absolutely right. It was about talking to the realtor, and the realtor probably saying, well, let's just ease up on that language. And that's years ago now. Thankfully, we've evolved in this, where we realize it's about getting information to the consumer.
The person actually is buying this puppy.
Yes, you're spending a ton of money in a lot of cases, especially out here, as well as it's an emotional and it's an investment for your future and your family's future. So it's been very good to see the evolution of this go from that sort of quiet speak to full-on disclosure. And I really am thankful for working with professionals like yourself and other realtors who really get that and say, hey, we want our consumers to be 100% informed. And it just makes everybody's life so much easier.
Yeah, it used to be really, we went through the phase. So now we're going from just this bare bones report and, like you said, pencil and paper, and maybe the consumer or the client not really even be involved in the conversation. Now we're getting to a little further ahead where they're given a report, still maybe not a lot of understanding on how it works. And then they take that report, I would say this was kind of 2006 and 7. And they were taking that report to push back down on the price because the prices were going up so high.
Right.
And I know they were coming straight at you going, well, is this house worth it? I mean, what were those times like?
Well, one thing I thankfully was taught when I first got into this 18 years ago already was managing expectations of your client. It's like, wait a minute, I'm here, I'm the messenger here. I'm going to do the most thorough inspection of this entire structure that I can physically get to. I'm not going to tear into walls or break things to do so. I'm not allowed to give estimates nor do repairs. And I use the phrase in my reports when I make a recommendation on further evaluations by, let's say, a heating guy for an HVAC contractor. I recommend those be done prior to the end of your contingency period, because there may be defects that we cannot see just doing that one inspection. We can see that's an older unit, let's say, or something like that, but on a visual inspection, you cannot see inside the unit. You're not allowed to take it apart. So if then that consumer takes the information and follows those guidelines prior to the end of contingency, then they have an actual number if they want to negotiate with. And I just think it's the smartest way to go. It was when I first started in the industry, I actually had a realtor ask me, hey, would you mind going through this with a little bit of blinders on? I said, I'm sorry, you hired the wrong guy. I can't do that, So, like I said, it's thankfully evolved, and I think the industry is very strong, and it's growing, which is a good thing. I always want to have my clients there, at least at the end of the inspection, if they can be. If not, I welcome a phone conference, whatever we can do, sit down with both of us, have the reports, and have a discussion. Going back to the property is, I'm usually so busy that it's difficult to do so, but if I can, certainly we can do that. But at the end of the day, like I said, it's about getting these people information, getting the clients information, and 99.9% of realtors want and appreciate that.
Yeah, boy, we could just take a whole off-ramp or on-ramp on the quality of realtors and how they've changed and how they look at the home inspection.
We can do the same with inspectors as well.
I think they've gotten better. I don't know if the training's better or, I think all the pre-reports I've been getting lately, the buyers, because we get them ahead of time now. We don't go get them very much anymore. And buyers are asking, is this a good inspector? I'm like, yeah, they're like one of the best. And then, the next day I'm looking at someone else, another report. I'm like, yeah, they're one of the best. I just kind of been come across a lot of good ones.
Well, thankfully, with being here in California, we have what's called CREA, which is California Real Estate Inspectors Association. And then we have a national organization called ASHI, which is the American Society of Home Inspectors. And there are affiliations that require you to have, as an inspector, continuing education. These systems in these homes are getting more and more complex. And if an inspector is not up to date on these things, for instance, I'll give an example of, we're using this stuff called CSST gas tubing. It's coated stainless steel tubing. It looks like a yellow tube, and people are hooking up gas-fired appliances to it. There's two different types. There's a little tiny one you buy at the hardware store. That's a different unit. I'm talking about a larger gas pipe. We have found that if this is installed without the proper bonding and without going to electrical stuff, that if there's a lightning strike at or near the residence, all that energy is flowing through the structure. If this bonding is not in place, the energy from that lightning will perforate that gas tubing. Now, we just started to find this out. This stuff's been being used for years. And with the lightning storms we had last year in California, there were pipes that were perforated and across the country. So again, having continuing education ensures the purchaser that this inspector should be up to date on these sort of items because they're being installed very quickly. It's, and if, we go, building materials are changing at an amazing pace. In California, we have the whole energy, it was a Title 29 energy codes. And that's, in California, we are 2 or 3 years behind the nation in our code, and we're 2 years. So right now we're building to the 2019 code. So we're 2 years behind the code cycle, and we're 3 years behind the rest of the nation as far as the
code. What's a report when something's like not to current code?
Well, that's why
penalize the homeowner for code that's not even it hasn't even gotten here yet.
Well, that's just it. We, as a home inspector, we do not do code compliant inspections. Because they change and we don't know, if the house was built 20 years ago, obviously it's not going to be today's code. However, if a remodel has been done and the water heater is not strapped, we know it's a code violation. So for strapping of water heaters, carbon monoxide detectors, smoke alarms, yeah, that's a code issue. That's very plain to see. Building practices, however, that are hidden like behind walls, which are required today that weren't 20 years ago, we can't see. That's why these cannot be code compliant inspections to a degree. I hope that makes sense.
I think there's always that problem. Like I showed a house this week where I showed 2 of them. We can't find any permit records for it. So despite them wondering if the county's going to come back and say you have an illegal structure, I was like, well, it's been there since 1964. They've had a lot of opportunity. I wouldn't worry about that at this point. But I mean, all we can do is have somebody look at it and tell you if the house is safe. But again, you can't see in there. But I guess it's that whole other conversation of, do permits actually make a house safe? I mean, we've had some real wonky guys come out and look where my husband says, wow, it's too bad that guy didn't really know anything because he would have noticed this, this, and this. And I knew how to get around him. You know what I mean? So
yes,
that code compliant versus is it safe? So I guess my question is really, when you go to a house, could you just say, look, this is basically what I would not consider safe. This is what I would consider safe. And permits and codes kind of are over.
Yeah. And you're right about, I recently inspected a structure in Marina that had been given a certificate of occupancy. Are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you stopped moving. The camera stopped moving.
It did stop moving.
Yeah, you're frozen in time.
Uh-oh. That's okay. We're still...
Yeah, no worries. So anyway, the house had been given a certificate of occupancy. However, the exhaust pipe for the water heater located in the garage had not been installed. So every time they turn on the hot water, they're putting combustion carbon monoxide into the garage. So how did that get passed? Who knows? Did the inspector... So... people are only human. I understand that. That's kind of a biggie. However, the benefit of pulling a permit for construction is that hopefully you have some educated eyeballs on it. And, they're doing their jobs and they're coming at various phases of construction. Oh, electrical looks good. Framing looks good. Plumbing looks good. But always remember, codes are the least common building practice.
Oh, no, wait, whoa, stop the presses here. What do we got here? Codes are the
least common building practice. In other words, this is the bare minimum you have to do for this to pass code.
So that reminds me, just to jump off here for a minute. Oh my gosh, remember that brand new house you inspected for me years ago and you turned on the dishwasher and it squirted water across the but they did it backwards, right?
Say it again, please.
What did they do it backwards or something? I think they hooked it up to the...
Well, yeah, what it is the discharge pipe goes into a garbage disposal. And in the little tube on the garbage disposal, there's a little disc you have to tap out or the water shoots out of the anti-siphon valve or the drain line was clogged. But yeah, so, it's interesting. Like, again, I go in homes all the time. There's a lot of remodeling going on, as you know. So I'll go into a house, the hot and cold lines are reversed. Is that a code issue? I don't know. It's just poor construction, maybe.
It happens so much. That's very common.
Mm-hmm. Or I'll go in and check electrical, and 70% of the outlets in one room are wired incorrectly. You know, how did this pass? So again, people are human. We all make mistakes, but you would hope that a code official, building official, is actually going around. And I don't know if their job is to check outlets. I would think so.
But
at least one or two.
And that's why I brought up the dishwasher, though. I mean, that particular inspection, that was pretty early on in my career. It taught me brand new houses are probably they're the most needed to be checked, almost because it hasn't even been used yet, to figure out if it's wrong.
Yes.
And to get it checked and have the builder fix it, versus someone living there, they're like, oh yeah, we use hot and cold and we figured it out, or,
Right. On a new structure, I would have one done at purchase, and I would have another one done at 10 months, because I believe it's 12 months that the builder is responsible for all defects.
Okay.
So you inspect, then you come back again in 10 months, and now that basically the ship has gone through its maneuvers and people live in the home, they've run water, and then you go back, let's say, under the structure, look for leaks, things like this, and you have an independent third-party document to give to the contractor or the builder, as opposed to the homeowner who they think is some emotional person. It's not. It's this independent third party. Which, one thing I do want to say, kind of backing up here, is that as home inspectors, we have no vested interest in the outcome of this sale. So we are and should be an independent third party. And
there's some that aren't.
No, there are not. There are guys out there who I think are not helping out their clients.
No.
I have no, like I said, I have no vested interest in the outcome of the sale. And my reports, I try to be as black and white as possible. Hey, yes, this leaks. We should have it repaired. Here's what's going to happen if it doesn't leak, if we don't get it repaired, excuse me. This was wired incorrectly. What is the possibility of this? Let's get someone in here. It's black and white. And when you can support those things with photographs, it's kind of hard for anybody to refute, I was in I'm sorry, go ahead.
The pictures are so key, though, because we use them for all sorts of things. I can sometimes get bids with those. I can sometimes have a conversation with people, and we can, especially now that we can't really actually stand there with a report anymore, it's go see the property, and then you got to do everything online, and the pictures are just so important.
Well, Michelle, for instance, I was in a brand new house in Pebble Beach, and I noticed as I was walking around the house, there were only maybe 3 or 4 of the vents for the sub area. So when I went into the crawl space, they had poured what's called a rat slab. So on the dirt, they poured a concrete slab just to seal it, encapsulating the crawl space, which is great. However, when the concrete cures, it off-gases vapor, water. And with the ventilation being minimal, the floor insulation was wringing wet, right? So this place was like raining inside when I'm underneath the house. There's water droplets coming down. And we're building now with what's called OSB, which is oriented strand board for framing, members, and flooring. And it's basically glue and dust, wood chips, but it does not tolerate water. So this structure, being weeks old, maybe a month and a half old, was already starting to show signs of mold and deterioration to the framing members because of that ventilation.
Health issue too, right? Because that mold is just breeding at that point.
Once it takes off, if it's not caught and remedied, then, oh my gosh, yeah, it's structurally, you can render a house unsound. It's certainly make it unsafe for people to live in.
That must have been disappointing. Was that for just a new home, or was that for a buyer buying it from?
Yeah, no, it was for a buyer who was buying his brand new house, all excited. And when I went in there, they were floored. And I said, well, there are now here's where we go back to the codes. I said, there's certain design criteria for ventilation. It's 1 net square foot of venting for every 100 square feet of sub area, let's say. And that includes the mesh size of the vent screen. And if it's inadequate, those formulas are there for a reason. So it was totally inadequate. So I went back. They asked me to come back some weeks later after the contractor went and he cut probably 30 more vents, and the condition was gone. Everything was dry. They had cleaned off the fungus that had started to grow, removed and replaced the insulation, and it was perfect. So,
wow.
Yeah. So again, there's another example.
Did they dry it? Did they try to dry? I mean, did they put blowers in there?
Yeah. So they cut the vents and then they put fans at one end of the structure that don't blow in. They pull air across. So, and then they remove the insulation. So then it just cures the issue immediately. I mean, right away. And when I first got in, the very first time I went in, I could notice the humidity in there. And the next time it was perfect. But there's an example, going back to how did this not get caught by the building inspector? How did this get overlooked?
They just kind of go look for the items they're looking for. I don't think they look for the overall. It's like when people have a house that they're like, oh, half of the house is unpermitted and all done this work. And then they say, well, we're going to go get a roof. We want to get a roof permit. Are they going to notice anything else? I'm like, probably not. They'll just come look at the roof or the phases, but.
Mm-hmm. It used to be where I think, especially, well, I'm going to say it in Santa Cruz County, especially I think, that the building officials would come out to look at a roof, let's say, and they would start looking at everything. And I think they heard a lot of grumbling about that. So I had my roof done a couple of years ago. They came out and specifically looked at the roof, made sure I had carbon and monoxide detectors like you're supposed to, and that was it. And it was fantastic. So
yeah, I had 2 roofs where they just came and looked at, they came and looked at the framing for the sheathing, and then they came and looked for the nail off. And then, the last one, they did come in and look at the carbon monoxide detector. They didn't even notice the laundry room that was turned into a studio, which is fine. But then we got, we plumbed out a bathroom and a laundry room. And we had the shower cardboard box in the backyard, and the neighbor saw it and called the county and said we were putting a bathroom in this workshop behind the house. We got this huge workshop, and they thought we were turning that into a house because they saw the box. So the county, like the head guy comes out and he storms through the place, and he kind of rattled my son a little bit. And, he said, well, do you live here? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, oh, you're the owner? And because my son's untitled, he was like, yeah. And he's like, oh, and he looked around and he was like, there wasn't anything he could do because it really wasn't violating anything that they could really pin anything to. And you had an owner on site, which makes it even harder. So that whole exercise in futility might have been why they stopped doing that, because they really didn't have anything to really go on. I mean, they could have said you shouldn't have a bathroom there, but we had a sewer hookup and we had hot and cold water hookup. There was no new hookup. That was a legal hookup. So, you know what I mean? I think that's probably a good example of why fishing doesn't always turn out. They wasted a lot of people's time, and we had to do one correction, and they sent this guy out, and my son stayed home from work and everything. The guy totally snuck up, signed some piece of paper, and threw it on the door. Didn't even come to take a look. So, I mean, I think that's a good example of why fishing is kind of precarious for them. It's time consuming, and it may not be what it seems.
Exactly. And why not just go out and do what you're specifically tasked to do?
We asked for a permit, and yeah, absolutely.
But
go ahead.
Well, as far as the inspection industry goes, we talk about home inspection. We're all human, so everybody makes mistakes. But that's what kind of goes back onto managing expectations. If a home inspector, like if I go into a sub area or an attic and I cannot physically fit in somewhere without trampling over heat ducts or causing damage, I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to state that, show a picture. Could not physically fit in this area, and it's okay to do that. It's preferred. And I've been in many, many times in crawl spaces where I've seen the damage of someone trying to be a hero. Of course, you never want to be complacent and do the best you can, but to do so and cause damage is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, you again, you want to do the best job you possibly can do, and you're only there a short period of time. And one of the things I get asked often is about earthquakes.
Oh, that's coming No. It's a thing. You know what? Insurance companies now, when they call to ask about insurance, they're asking if they want earthquake insurance. That's why it's coming.
Oh,
So they're calling in and we're making them call the insurance people beforehand, like way even before you get there, because we have to figure out which houses may not be able to get insurance because of the fires. And I'm getting this earthquake question every time now, and I realized it's because they're trying to add that, hey, we won't protect you in a fire, but how about an earthquake?
okay. Because it's like, will this house withstand an earthquake? And I said, well, describe the earthquake. I mean, if the water heater is flying across the room, it's time to go. So, I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah, what's the answer? I mean, if you say depending on the earthquake, is that?
Of course, if it's another Loma Prieta, I mean, we don't have any ideal way to predict that. I do tell people, like, some of the larger water heaters, they have 3 straps. In some areas, they're required. And I've been asked, hey,
water heaters in houses, inside living spaces, that just drives me insane. That is it's so scary for me to have that thing with gas hooked up to it and lots of water inside the house.
Well, it's funny you say that. I was just in a house yesterday where the water heater was located inside an interior closet in a laundry room, and the drip pan had 2 inches of water in it. So luckily it had a drip pan and a discharge pipe, because had it not, no one's living in the house. This house would have been flooded because it was just leaking away. And underneath the house was soaking wet. So yeah, not always a good thing. But yeah, people ask about the earthquake thing, and I say, well, if an earthquake is strong enough for that water heater to tear off the wall, let's say, and rip through the strapping that's hopefully done correctly, it may be the last of your concerns. It's probably a pretty big earthquake. Get out of the house. But it's interesting how things are evolving. I mentioned the whole climate thing. During the fires here in Ben Lomond, we were evacuated. And when we came back, my neighbor who lives behind me is a realtor. And we were talking over the fence, and he said, I got a phone call from my insurance company saying, we're not going to be renewing your fire insurance.
Yeah.
I mean, they hadn't even finished putting the fires out, but that's a whole different story. But yeah, things are definitely changing here in good old California, everywhere, really.
Yeah, and insurance is like it used to be kind of like a week before close of escrow. We'd be like, oh, call your insurance, we'll get that. Now it's like, call your lender, read the inspections, and call your insurance company and have them look at this address even before you write an offer, which is something I advised before. I had a question about water heaters. Oh, what was that? Oh, I know. This is something, talking about permits and codes and all this sort of stuff. I see so many water heaters put in by what I deem reputable companies in town, and they're not strapped correctly. What is that? It drives me crazy. There's this name on there, and I'm like, I have had you to my house helping us, and you can't. It's just, it flummoxed me. I can't even understand how they can get away with that.
I don't know. Again, okay, so how many times have you probably heard this from a contractor, plumber, whoever, saying, your home inspector should have seen it? I've heard it a lot. And my standard answer is, well, if there were great contractors, you probably wouldn't need me. Because the water heater would have been strapped. The electrical would have been done correctly. So let's not go there.
Here's the next episode, home inspector versus contractor.
It's weird. Over the years, it's gotten a lot better. There's not as much chest thumping and that kind of thing, But yeah, Michelle, no, I see it all the time. I see everything, all these things all the time, and it just blows my mind. You go back to the permit process. You're supposed to get a permit to change a toilet here.
Anything, yeah, just about anything, really.
Mm-hmm. So, how many times, though, have you seen trucks pulling out of Home Depot with water heaters in the back? And it's not a plumber's truck, Well,
yeah, I was talking about the ones that are labeled, but yeah, I mean,
yeah, no, I got you.
Your name on there, you should tighten that. You should tighten that up.
That is true.
But yeah, I mean, I see a lot of crazy stuff in houses. Just lately, though, I feel like we have so many different houses and so many different ages on the houses, but I feel like there was a roofing contractor that was going through a neighborhood at one point, because I'm just seeing houses over and over again where the roof's done, fireplace is done.
Mm-hmm.
And the fireplace kind of made more sense with the earthquake. They kind of lasted as long as they were going to last, and this is probably it. But the commonality of the stuff that I'm seeing that's outdated is getting to be just a high point. And then there's always the home inspection. If there's not a dirty heater furnace, or if there's not a reverse polarized outlet or switched hot and cold, I feel like, well, obviously this home inspector doesn't know what they're doing, because got to find one of those things. Oh, or the uncovered junction box in the basement or the attic. And I talked to my husband about that, because he's an electrician, and I said, why is that? And he goes, well, we get up there and we're doing all that work and we just get tired of it. We don't want to crawl up there to put a cover on it.
Yep. Every house has at least one.
Every house has everyone. It's so funny. It's just so funny.
So when you talk of roofs and things, so a roof, for instance, it's basically a wear component, like a mechanic, like a furnace or a water heater. The design life is only so long. And we see that, like you're saying, often because in my reports, when you have a furnace that's over 20 years old, you say, hey, it's towards the end of design life. And we recommend it's either further evaluated or monitored or whatever the recommendation may be. And I've gotten some feedback over the years, negative, from realtors saying, you always say this, and why? And it's because we're taught, and experience shows us, that 20 years on a furnace is towards the end of design life. And that furnace may have only been used 5 hours out of the year, but we don't have any idea of that. We're there for 2 hours in a certain time frame. So you call it out because it's for the health and safety of the people buying the house. Inspections are not performed for the agents or for ourselves. It's for the people buying the structure. Yeah. And what I find too, Michelle, in a lot of these homes I do in Carmel and vacation homes where people are only there 2 or 3 weeks a year, is that the furnace or the water heaters aren't used and they sit static for months and months. The people come in, they start using the systems, they start to leak or break down. And that's another, and even though they're well in the design life, they're fine. They're 10 years old, let's say, but they've sat static for almost a year, and so it's interesting to see these things, especially things close to the ocean. It's interesting to watch how design lives change. I mean, that unit was done after half of its design life, let's say. So.
Yeah, and I put home warranties on all the houses my buyers buy, because I have learned over the years that, that new buyer will use the house differently, and they use systems differently. And the hot water heater is the most common. Either they take longer showers, or they're doing the dishwasher more than that person, and the hot water heater inevitably always goes out, or the furnace. They just differently, and it's just that little thing that was hanging on with that previous person that just decides we're going.
Yeah. Yes. Again, like I said, I do a lot of homes that are vacation rentals or vacation homes. And it's amazing. The windows that were fine the last time we were there now no longer open, because they're close to the ocean. There's just a lot of influences that come in. And if, houses are meant to be lived in, and they sit static, things happen. You get asked a lot, will the plumbing leak? Well, it could. It could leak 30 minutes after I leave. It's another, again, going back to managing expectations. We're only on site for a couple of hours or so, plus or minus. And we're reporting on the conditions at the time of inspection. And as you know, you could walk out, lock the door, and the water heater will break. Or one of the rubber lines for the clothes washer will pop and flood the house.
Well, don't forget, we're always kind of moving too. That's what people don't realize, is that I notice we're always kind of got a little action going. I notice it more at night when I'm, going to sleep and it's still. So that's the other thing people don't realize, is that just lately I've been saying, we're on a living planet. Things keep moving. It's like people like static, and we're just not in a static environment. And, and it's not just the ocean. I mean, we're just trees root up, or you know what I mean? Like things are just kind of moving. And
one of the we had solar panels put on here a couple of years ago now, and one of the interesting things was they came out and they looked at the design of the rafters in the attic to make sure the solar panels can handle the wind load, because the wind gets underneath them and wants to pull them off the roof. So remember the windstorm we had here? I don't know when it was, 8 months ago, 6 months ago.
Yeah, we had a good one a couple of days ago.
Yeah, so I'm laying in bed listening to doors slam and garbage cans roll down the street, wondering if my solar panels are going to be flying off the roof.
Maybe you could your house could fly.
Maybe. Yeah, going to Nebraska or wherever.
Yeah. It sounds to me like you almost have the opportunity for a whole nother business, really, of just a yearly maintenance check where you just go in and, yeah, the house is good to go for people who aren't in the house that much.
Well, yes. I mean, so many times you go into a home and it's like, if this leak was known 6, 8, 10 months ago when it first started, we'd be repairing one piece of pipe as opposed to replacing a bathroom floor. Right. I think it behooves everybody that owns a home to get it inspected at least every other year, at least do a termite inspection.
Yeah, termites good too because of the water leaks. They usually pretty good.
I mean, water is the most destructive force, really. Well, fires aren't so good either. Right. But yeah, I mean, a leak, like I said, a leak in a copper pipe can just do an amazing amount of damage.
That's interesting. So
yeah, it's happens a lot.
So I don't think I have any other questions for you. You have any other things you want people to know?
Well, yes, I do actually, about home inspectors. I would recommend, if I was hiring an inspector, that he or she be a certified ASHI or CREA or affiliated inspector. That tells me they have continuing education. I would not be afraid to say, hey, are you insured? Because you're going to be climbing on my roof, and that ladder of yours is leaning on my gutter next to my very expensive Mercedes, which I don't have, but if I had one, that's what I would do. You know, so are you insured? I would ask my inspector that. I would also want to know, exactly what they're going to do. Like, what are you going to do? Are you going to go on the roof? Some inspectors don't. Some inspectors, are you going to test the smoke alarm? Some inspectors don't. So as a consumer, ask those questions. When you go get your haircut or whatever, you ask a ton of questions, then, and don't be afraid, I guess, to ask them.
Get a haircut.
Don't be afraid to ask the inspector, exactly what you're going to do. And then I would let him do his thing. Just leave a person do their job and say, please, afterwards, let's talk before you leave and show me what you found. I have had, for instance, 3 weeks ago, I was in a very large home. The buyer could not be there, but his father, the engineer, I think, with a very what sounded Russian accent, was there.
Where this is going.
And I could not turn around without almost running into this individual. He was in my back pocket. Finally, I said, sir, I appreciate your wanting to understand what's going on here. And I will do my best to explain this to you. However, you're in my way. You have to be, as an inspector, you got to sort of set parameters. Now, he was good about it until I got on the roof. And I turned around and there he is.
Oh, no.
I said, man, I can't have you be doing that. So we did the inspection, and the last part, I'm in the sub area, which is huge, and it's fully finished. Again, it's like a mini basement, but it's very short. And I go way in the sub area, and I turn around, and there he is. So I said, yeah, okay, there's no shaking this guy. But so, anyway, back to the original point is let your home inspector, he or she, let them do their thing, and then talk. I mean, an inspector should be willing to give you information. It's not a black mark if they find something wrong. It's like no one's doing anything wrong here, and so It used to be where some agent would be standing there wringing their hands hoping you didn't find anything. And that mentality has gone 180 degrees. It's like, I want you to find everything possible that we need to find that's pertinent. If there's a crack in the concrete that's insignificant, we really don't need to know. That's cosmetic. However, if there's something else, a larger issue, we need to know about it.
Yeah. But in our market today, it's more about, okay, this is what you're going to deal with later, because you're not going to get any leverage with the seller for it.
I know. Yeah.
So you're certified. I can't remember the acronym, and then there's ASHI, right?
There's CREA and ASHI. I'm a certified ASHI inspector.
So you carry insurance.
Yes.
Has there been talk of having you guys be licensed?
It bumps around every once in a while, and thank God they keep shooting it down. Do we really want our home inspectors being licensed by the state, the same people that bring you DMV?
Well, I'm licensed by the state, so I don't know.
Right, but that's true.
I think the only reason I would say no is only because, especially in my industry, I still feel like it's just a revenue generating operation for them. I don't feel like they really... I've seen some stuff done that the people still have their license. So, I mean, I'm not for it. I was just curious.
Well, that, Michelle, and then basically the inspection gets done down to a form provided by the state, right?
You think so?
I do. I do. I think that it also maybe takes away some of the incentive for educating yourself further, like offering other services like thermal imaging or drone photography. I recently used my drone to drop over the cliffs on East Cliff to look at the erosion below the home line. And I don't know what would happen if the state got hold of it, but I do agree it would certainly be a revenue gathering source.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not here to bag on the state. I was just kind of curious about that.
Yeah. So licensing, it gets kicked around every once in a while. We see Texas is licensed, for instance. So when they come to the association conferences, it's interesting to, they're all just sort of cookie cutter, I don't know what separates you from the other guys. And I don't know that a whole lot about it, but it just seems to me sort of standard. Oh. And I think that good, healthy competition is, is for people to get out there and be better, be more educated, educate yourself constantly, go to meetings, go to seminar, Mm-hmm. There is a lot of really good continuing education programs that are constantly, with the whole Zoom thing, it's really helped with that.
Zoom. So what funny story you got for me? What's the craziest thing? Why does this keep doing this?
Well, craziest thing. I don't know. I've had some weird things happen. I once was doing an inspection for a very good real estate agent where I went around the backyard and I wanted to look over a fence, and there was a 5-gallon bucket sitting there with a lid on it. So I thought, well, I'll just step on this bucket and take a peek over this fence. And when I put my foot on the bucket, I guess it had been sitting in the sun for a while, and my foot went right through the lid, and it was a bucket full of fish emulsion, which is a very insanely smelly fish fertilizer. And it went up inside my pant leg and in my shoe, and basically the whole neighborhood stunk for a couple of days, I guess. I was embarrassed. So, that kind of stuff happens. We're all human again. Knocked on a door a month or so ago, and very nice lady answered. And unfortunately, she had forgot to put her towel up all the way. So it was a very interesting, like, whoa, good morning. Oh my gosh. Speaking of Zoom meetings, we had a Zoom meeting not too long ago. And I guess one of the people in the meeting did not realize that we could see them. So she pulled her shirt off and started taking her shoes off. And it was an interesting thing. So I guess those are kind of amusing anecdotes.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's just the human element of the stuff that we see. I was just thinking of something funny that happened the other day. I can't remember it today. There's just so much stuff that happens. we see so much, or
Yeah.
a dog. I feel like I've gotten a lot of my stripes. The market's still hard to get a handle on, but some of the basic human stuff is pretty consistent.
Well, do you see what I'm seeing too is a huge influx of city dwellers? I mean, getting out of the big cities since COVID.
Yeah, I was going to mention that what we also see for your comments on vacant houses or left empty houses is they're coming in and they're not Airbnb-ing them and they're not vacationing rental them. That more than likely not even really letting other people that they know stay there. So I think we're going to see a huge increase in vacant houses, which I don't know what I think about the short-term rental industry. I really don't have much of an opinion on it, but I do have an opinion on vacant houses. I think that they're just blight on a neighborhood. I think they never really serve a neighborhood. A bad neighbor is a bummer, but a vacant house it's a nuisance, and it just kind of creates a void. We have one on our block. We call it the monster house because it's just this big house with this bougainvillea that's grown over half of it, and they take okay care of it, but we've had homeless try to break into it more than a few times. They put up a fence to stop that. They leave garbage cans out so people use the garbage cans. People park in their driveway that we don't want them there. It just...
No, it's an attractive nuisance. I mean, it creates issues for the rest of the neighborhood. It's a blight,
So I would, yeah, the city dwellers, yeah, they're coming. And that's the other thing too. I'm gonna do a short episode after talking about we're still not sure if we're just the flavor of the month. I mean, Santa Cruz is a great place, but it does have its limits. I mean, we have service issues in terms of stores and some of the things you can enjoy in bigger cities. And we've got traffic like yesterday. I don't know if you were around yesterday in town. Holy cow. Practically the town was shut down because 2 county projects were done on Soak Hill Drive and they didn't talk to each other. So they shut down a main artery in town. So there's me getting into Santa Cruz and how somebody was clearly not doing their job. And there's those limitations. Versus, say, San Francisco, there's generally an out, right? There's a big enough town you can figure out how to get away. Here, you just get to sit there and wonder how long you get to sit there for.
You bring a lunch.
Yeah, it's great for that.
I am doing many, many more inspections, though, for people getting out of the cities. And what's interesting is, like, we talk about these houses near water they're maintenance-heavy structures. They require to be maintained, lived in, serviced. And some of them have been allowed to dilapidate a bit. And a lot of the folks are younger and they're quite affluent. And it's like they just don't, either they don't have a clue or they just don't care. It's like, okay, great. For instance, I found this one deck on a slope that was it was a huge deck. It was structural, had a lot of structural steel going back to a cliff. And it was going to probably take upwards of $100,000 to repair. It's like, okay, great, no problem. And I'm wondering, are you understanding me, or are you? I guess you have enough money where this doesn't matter to you.
Ellen and I had a conversation over too. Is when I get home after I see a house, because there's home owners and there's home kind of livers. They just live in the home and they don't really understand that the care and that it takes. There's always something that needs to be done, unfortunately. And there's a lot of places to play here. So I have to explain buyers, they're here because they want to mountain bike. They want to surf. They want to walk, jog. Our house is not always their priority. But as far as if they understand it, I'm not really sure. I have sold a few houses in the last couple of years to people that it was just like, I was actually a listing agent on one that needed a new deck upwards of $150,000. They put in a new driveway. They haven't touched that deck. I wouldn't walk on that deck. And that deck has the most amazing view, but they got a new driveway. I was like, okay, yeah, it's their house. They can do what they want, but it's interesting.
Yeah, well, circling back, to the home inspection industry, we talk about decks a lot and where we live, and deck failures are a huge topic with us in our industry meetings.
Oh, interesting.
And again, as an inspector, you better be up on the types of building materials that are being used, the types of construction fasteners that are being used on these decks. We found, for instance, that pressure treated lumber, if the proper fasteners aren't used, will deteriorate the steel in the fasteners. So it's very important. So it goes back to the consumer about talking to your inspector. Make sure they're educated on these things, and they should be if they're affiliated with an association, because you're required to have continuing education units every year to maintain your certificate. So it's just so important that people are up on what they're doing. Like I said, these systems are changing all the time. They're not getting less complex. I think a lot of it is some of it is a bit misguided as far as, they really want to phase out gas-fired appliances, especially, they're already doing that in some cities.
Gas-fired? Gas. Well,
they want to go all electric.
We don't even have time for fireplaces, though.
Well, the thing is, we have a failing electrical grid here in the state. And to put more pressure on it, is that such a great idea? And when the wind blows and they turn off my power for 4 days, does that mean I can't start my generator? So, come on, guys, help. But again, as a home inspector, it just behooves you to provide the greatest service you can to avoid any litigious stuff, of course, but to educate your clients, to stay educated. So if any inspectors are out there listening to this, stay educated, you guys and girls.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just we're just trying to get them to understand what they're buying. Like I said, there was a couple different facets at it first. It was kind of a list of stuff to do. Then it turned into a way to beat up on the seller because the prices were getting so out of hand. And now it's just, okay, I'm paying this much. Well, at least I know what I'm getting because that's where we're at. And even then, sometimes, after the home inspection, talk to the home inspector, we kind of go back and forth with the seller. Sometimes we don't always know. It's still, some stuff is just kind of like, well, that was before me. We don't know what they did.
Yes. It goes back to remodels too. Some of these remodels I'm seeing lately, on some places, I should say, they're just not very well done. And, I don't get it because it's very expensive to do these things. As a matter of fact, I was in a house just yesterday in Pebble Beach that had a ton of electrical work done. And in the attic, so we talk about open electrical boxes. I found probably a dozen of those, as well as electrical connections where the outlets were just hanging in space. They weren't even fastened. And the junction boxes, not the outlets. So it's like, what's going on, guys? Where's the quality control here? So as an inspector, you really need to be on your toes and to look for these things.
It's almost like the most important place that you guys go really are the attics and the basements, the places that the contractors don't even go check the work of the people that are working for them.
Sure.
Just say they did it. And, he's always been good before. I'm sure he finished it now. And
yeah. It hasn't burned down yet. Well, one attic access was literally up 3 feet above a bunk bed where these kids were sleeping. And right when I opened the attic, there are live wires with wire nuts on them just sitting next to the hatch. They're not in a box or anything. I'm thinking, it's just, come on. It doesn't take that much longer to do it correctly.
No.
In my opinion. But.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you very much for coming on and talking. I learned a lot. I was not expecting to learn so much.
Good. Well, I'm glad for that.
I think it's good to know. It sounds like not just maintaining your home, but also the new industry trends and what you guys are finding is really important for people to maybe have somebody come back in, or maybe have you even come in and look maybe before and after a remodel might be a way to go too, to just check on the remodeling work.
Depending on the scope of work, if it's stuff that we can see, fine.
Right.
Because remember, it's the last person out owns it. So if I go in and look at a contractor's work and I can only see a couple of outlets where inside the wall he's buried things, Yeah. But we certainly do the best we can as long as that everybody knows you're coming in after the fact. I can only see what's here, And I know you pulled permits, so hopefully it's all the rest. I hope he pulled permit.
Well,
I don't know. It's, again, like I said, we're all human and everybody makes mistakes. And I'm not here to rag on anybody or anything like that. But Michelle, there used to be, in my opinion, builders in the 50s and 60s who took pride in what they did. And now it just seems to be about how quickly we can get things done.
Yeah, so the way I explain it is in the 50s and 60s, we kind of had craftsmen, like houses that were, people put their name on them. Then in the 70s, I'd say some of those guys were still around, but they started to get into poorer materials. And then the 90s, they were, I don't know, all geeked out and they were just doing it faster. So they had guys that weren't really trained. They didn't have great materials. And then they had timelines. And then, because actually 90s is, you inspect more homes, but for 90s homes, that's usually where I'm a little more worried than the house that was built in the 50s or 60s. Typically, those are fairly solid homes, but there are some eras that I'm like, oh, we're gonna have to check this out and that out, and
I would totally agree with that. Especially some of the construction materials. I mean, glue and sawdust is not always a good thing to use.
Right.
Not only for its structural incapabilities, but because it's always off-gassing. Formaldehydes and things like that. And we've heard over the years about the lawsuits about Louisiana Pacific siding and things like that failing.
Yeah, that was a big debacle on a few houses here in town, actually. Very expensive. Wow.
And now we're doing, so real quick, I did a thermal imaging job in Arizona as part of a class. And, it rains there once a year. And they were finding in these stucco houses, there were horizontal cracks in the walls. So we went there at night after the house had heated up and the sun went down. If the moisture is trapped under the stucco, it holds the heat longer because it's more dense, right? So we're able to hit it with a thermal imaging camera and see these big spots in the siding that were had trapped moisture because they were using that glue-oriented strand board siding. And once the moisture got in there, it feeds on the glues and it turns into mold. And again, this is a house that seen rain maybe 4 times, in 3 years. It was a new tract of homes. Pretty amazing. They're just terrible material, really.
There's always fun stuff to find in there. Well, I really appreciate your time today. That was awesome.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. It's good to see you.
It was good to see you. Hopefully I'll see you in a couple weeks, actually. I'll be giving you a call. Got a few things coming up. Hopefully you have some time for me.
Of course, yes. Please give me as much lead time as you can.
Yes. The guys that I like, I know. I got to get on your calendars. But anyway, well, thank you so much.
My pleasure. I hope it was informative. It was a lot of fun.
Hey, thank you for listening. If you want to talk more, find me on livethesantacruzlife.com, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, or give me a call. My number's in the show notes. Love to hear from you.